Has been hit. The thing says we're live. Hey guys, what's going on? Memes here. And we are now having, I believe it's the third inaugural Cosmic Council. I'm joined again by my co-host, Jennifer Sharp. Say hello to the good folks, Jen.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here.
All right. As well as Kale Fisher. Say hello to the folks, Kale.
Hello, people.
Cool. All right, so I completely forgot where the heck we left off. Something, probable distributions. Well, that's basically what I remember, because I've also spent the past week or so also talking about probable distributions and a lot of math camp. It's been interesting. But hey, Fractal, what's going on? Fractal, Nathaniel, thank you for joining, my friends. Hopefully we'll have a good, clean discussion and everything. No hidden below the belt and that jazz. But where you ladies have anywhere in particular you want to pick up on? Jed?
I have no idea where we were or anything like that exactly. Memes, what have you been up to with this moving out and investigating and stuff?
It's I did not see this happening, but eventually, basically about 3.5 to about 4 hours a day, we've been going through Professor Wildberger's math like foundations course. It's got like 272 videos. We're on like I think 86 or something now after about a little over a month, little under a month or so, as well as some math history. Then we can get into wild trig, and it's like all these things. It's like, all right, some math. I was terrible at math and everything. It's like, number one, now I have a reason to learn it. Number two, it's like the way he describes things. He's like, very often students are told, you need to learn this for a test. And that's terrible motivation. That resonates with me. Whereas if you just frame it as logic, okay. The interesting thing is when you do it that way, apparently a lot of modern mathematics, he started the lecture series in 2009. We're up to about 2012 or so. When you actually like delve into it, it's like, square root of negative of like 2 is like 1.42 dot dot dot. It's like dot 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 is not an actual answer. Can you circle this and say that is equivalent to that? No. If you're working in like trying to build something, maybe you only need 10 significant digits. Maybe that's perfectly fine. If you're trying to use logic and say this is equal to that, well, that is not the case. But we've been doing that. Learning a lot of different things, looking at different patterns as far as the golden ratio, the imaginary golden ratio, and apparently we found an equivalence. So you can have like n for one, and then literally any other integer for the other, and they're completely equal to each other. It's like, that's very interesting. Was not expecting that. It's been going pretty well. That's my quick take. It's
if I could just jump in to comment on what you said, I am hugely in favor of reframing mathematics as logic, because frankly, even the people who do mathematics don't necessarily have an understanding of its underlying logic. That's problematic for physics, and I feel like the people who are practicing philosophy need to be able to speak about math on a theoretical level, but that it's not realistic to expect them to learn all the how to do all the mechanics and crunch the numbers and all that stuff in math. But there needs to be a theoretical understanding of what the mathematics is for and what it's doing. And you have to be able to talk about that, because in my view, like, a philosopher's got to come in to fix problems between physics and math, which there are many. And so removing the numerical aspect and favoring a logical aspect over a numerical aspect, I think is extremely promising to bring more people into the discipline, which we really need. Is if it's just 3 or 4 people sitting in a room being like, gosh, we're so right. It's just would be nicer if other, a large group of people, as large as possible, could benefit from these discoveries.
I mean, personally, I'm not sure that happened. Maybe that happened back in like the 40s or something, when all of a sudden a bunch of smart math folks gathered around. They're like, you know what? 1 ain't prime anymore. Why? Something ring constructions or something like that. I don't know. I just sit back. I'm like, okay, if you're going to change your axioms, you can totally do that. Did you account for that with everything else that you're basing everything else off of? Maybe. I don't know. I just know when the course starts off with, all right, what do we consider numbers? It's like you do a dash on a piece of paper. All right, there you go. One. Keep on doing dashes, and you just build it up, literally like from the history, so you can kind of like see where like the logic originated from, and you kind of see where it trends, and then you learn things like, wait a second. According to, I'm not sure if it was Diophanttus or something, but some dude like 2,000 years ago figured out like how to do some conical projection to like get like the volume of a particular. I'm like, it's like, yeah, that was essentially the outline of calculus. I'm like, that that was 2,000 years ago. It was what, like 350, 300ish, something like that, 400. I'm just like, oh, huh. People knew a lot of stuff, and they also didn't have modern computers. Which, I mean, the better the tools get, the better the things we can construct, right?
Well,
Just
no,
that's my take. No.
no. The better the tools get, the worse the teachers get, because the teachers end up delegating to the tools. And the whole thing with AI is, in my view, to be a return to using people as teachers, not tools. The tools are secondary. The teacher is what is the one who's actually imparting the lessons.
Oh, sorry if I conveyed the tool. I was talking about tools aiding in the construction. I should have been more specific. It was kind of like, all right, you can do a screwdriver to screw things in. If you have a drill, I mean that's going to be more efficient. You'll have more precision, and if you have a better measuring device to get to a few more decimal places, I'll probably help you if you're trying to distribute, I don't know, whatever you need a way out there.
Yeah,
Um,
so what you're talking about is the right tool for the purpose. So what
hmm,
tool do we need for the purpose of a correct theoretical presuppositional understanding of mathematics and physics? And when I say presuppositional, I mean, how do we build math out of physics or physics out of math? And we do that through implementing what are called presuppositions or axioms that transform one into the other. So I think that's where the focus needs to be to move forward, is to answer what is the purpose of what we're doing? Is it mathematics for physics or physics for mathematics, or is math just its own discipline with its own logic that can never be anything more than valid because it's not physically grounded? Nerdy
I like
Rodent says, let's use reality. I agree, but that is not what constitutes reality, and where we ground in reality is not self-evident. So that would just be the first step to a much longer conversation if we can get the panel to agree that we ought to use reality.
where should we start?
What was that last word?
Oh, I was just looking at where we should start.
No, Jen, that last, you, was that a special word at the end there?
I was just trying to make reality rhyme with what I'd said before. So
She was
yeah,
being
it's a bit of a
clever.
bit of a face plant there, but yeah. So that's how I would say we got to look at it, and I think that's where Thad's thing is so powerful, because it's physical and it's also mathematical.
Yeah, well, of course, that's the foundation of neutron decay cosmology, the physicality. But regardless of that, in terms of education, as a lifelong educator, I just really have found that, grounding things in exactly like physical modeling of things, physical principles of things, the entire, like, all circular math, which is, basically some of the most essential work. It like expands into uh, imaginary numbers. All of these things are spin-offs that you can teach kids, from like taking a circle, rolling a circle, moving a circle in space, and saying, hey, look at the shape that traces as we like slide it forward through space. All of a sudden it's like, that's a sine wave. Hey, oh my gosh, actually it's also a coil. And then, oh, let's rotate it one more dimension at the same time. Now we have a whole bunch of these like closed harmonic loops over spheres. I mean, you can expand so much from sort of starting with Euclid and working out from there in so many ways. the harmonic series on your guitar string is the harmonic series of photons. I mean, it's like, the harmonic series is a harmonic series. You can add weight to tighten the string, you can add tension to tighten the string, but the fundamentals of doubling this, doubling that, or quadrupling that, these kinds of relationships are the fundamentals that I really think that, we could get into kids. Or Pascal's triangle. Oh my God, that thing has so much inside of it. And if we just like spent a year with kids investigating Pascal's triangle together and all the things that it has hiding within it in terms of like field strengths, all kinds of stuff, like the math relationships in it are really profound. And yet, it's sort of like this side weird thing that like, oh, that's like for those fancy mathematicians to play with, when really it reveals a lot about sort of like an underlying fundamental structure. But we always save that and have it couched under numerological aspects instead of sort of just being the natural flow of sort of like fractal harmonics that emerges.
It also makes it a lot more fun. I'm just listening to some of these lectures. I never thought I'd be like excited to get up. It's like I'm gonna go listen to a lot of math lectures today. That never really popped up on my radar as things I would be looking to do it as an adult human or scaly or whatever you want to say. But I'm just thinking within that realm. I'm like, I'm hearing these things, I'm seeing these examples. I'm like, these are fantastical things, and just thinking, I'm like, why was I never taught this in school? It would have made it a lot more interesting. And we have the ability, because like not everybody knows everything and stuff. And like you go through your education, how'd you learn things? Usually from other folks or a book or something. But we now have the ability to leverage technology to actually like look through, learn what others have done, look for other topics, use algorithms as potential guides to help us to maybe refine our questions or specifically what we're looking for. Because a lot of time it's like, yes, I'm looking, forming a proper question can be really hard. I know I ask questions all the time and they're very ill posed. So
Yeah, because the math teacher's not going to be able to answer past a certain point because none of them has been taught to question the Euclidean axioms. And so without being able to do that, you're never going to get to physicality because there's a problem in the Euclidean axioms with regards to physicality, which is straight lines. There's no physical straight lines, and that's compounded into the parallel lines postulate, which presupposes multiple straight lines. So you have a paradigm level, if you want to call it a contradiction, but it's really an incompatibility with how physics actually operates. There's no lines in physics. A line is something is an idea we constructed, entirely our creation, just like paper.
so is that like the parallel postulate?
Yeah, but it's deeper than that. It's actually straight lines that are problematic in physics. Because what
I
physical basis do we have to infer the presence of straight lines? Only our own experience, which is a absolute shit basis to base physics off of, which will never work, and which hopefully people realize will never work because our own perception is an aggregate, is an aggregation, and what we're after is fundamental things. And fundamental things are not aggregate.
that's a much better response to what I was about to say, because I did hear something earlier. I didn't look into it, but apparently the disproven parallel postulate was recently proven by negation, maybe, or at least somebody was claiming that, saying that it does exist just within this particular multiverse of flat worlds, and then everything else. So I'm like, I didn't really look into it. I just heard that earlier, and I'm like, so I mean, is that the best basis? I mean, how are we basing what we define things? I thought like bijection was stronger, but
Well, you need a
it's
bijection between physicality and mathematicality, which is where we don't have that right now. You don't even need a bijection, you need an injection from physicality to mathematicality.
if we could get a bijection, so that'd be better.
Well, a bijection might not make sense because you can't make math into physical matter necessarily. Math is an abstract conceptualization. And the argument I'm making is basically that our foundations of mathematics are problematic, not that they don't work for their purpose, because they do, but they are problematic for physics. because of the straight lines and other things. Atomism is a problem as well, because you can't establish a basis for what the atom actually is. I know people are going to say, yeah, well, what about individual atoms of matter? Those things can't be established to exist independently of measuring devices. So even the idea that the universe is made up of atoms is problematic.
I mean, that's going to leave some folks raw there, Jen. But I'm not.
Well, if you're going to
I can't say you're wrong. I can't say you're wrong.
The thing is, if you're going to base reasoning off logic, it's going to be a little bit of a learning curve at the beginning, because you realize that what logic does is constrains your domain of possibility. So if we can't ground math in anything other than physics, then we have only physicality to ground mathematics with. And if we want to assert something extra physical, then we're basically saying the model cannot be correct anymore.
I mean, I may or may not have been part of a slight discussion earlier where it was like, yeah, we really need to get past the old particle model of physics and everything. And then I think my response was, well, I may not know what an electron is. The electron as a concept utilizing imperfect language is a useful thing, I claim.
No one's going to disagree that atomism is useful for chemistry. You need atomism for chemistry. But chemistry is not physics, and it's not philosophy either. So to me, chemistry is something that derives from physics because it's a particular implementation of physicality. It's not like you can predict everything with chemistry, but what can be predicted through chemistry, like the Gibbs free energy, that's an exact solution to a requirement of energy for formation of compounds.
So it sounds like we should be more specific and as accurate as we can with our language that we do have. And if we need to develop maybe
yes, we should be. We should be, but it's more than just specificity. It's realism in the sense of what actually do we have epistemic access to, and what is within our capacity, our reason capacity to actually conceptualize. Because a lot of mathematics is beyond the conceptualization of the majority of people, and I think that's problematic. Whereas logic, basically, if you get stuck on a certain point in logic, you just stop there and remain at that point until you sort it out. Like, for example, some people have trouble understanding what the problems are with infinite regress because they don't see any difference between a causal regress and a reasons regress. So reasons are problematic, but a causal infinite regress is not problematic. And it's very easy to get mixed up on that. So if you're just looking at a series of logical inferences, then and you don't agree with one of them, you just stop there. And you think about it until you realize what it's saying and why, it makes sense, and then you proceed. Whereas in math, you're kind of faced with, you got to know the whole thing to be able to do any problem. You have to understand how to proceed mechanically through a question, or even more difficult, think creatively to establish a proof in mathematics, which is, for those who don't know, normally done by a contradiction. So you're trying to prove A is true, you presume A is false, and then that leads to a contradiction, which allows you to infer through the allegedly valid structure of math that, you've proved what you set out to prove. Looks like we lost Callie.
She I think she might have to reboot real quick. But what I'm taking away from that is, well, what are your axioms? I mean, somebody taught me that.
I don't have axioms because I transcend axioms, because that's what my religion's all about. So I can suggest axioms for things. So if we're thinking about what is the purpose of an axiom, it is for establishing an inference model, which will allow us to span the space of a given discipline. If you're not applying to any discipline, then there's no axioms, because axioms co-arise with disciplines. Does that make sense?
Okay. So it'd be
so my
whatever.
Philosophy and my worldview is all about mastering axioms and then not using axioms anymore, because you're so good at axioms that you can use intra-axiomatic reason, so to speak, to do everything, which is sort of more complicated, but that's the end goal. And the intermediary goal is where we take these advanced topics like philosophy, physics, logic of mind, whatever you want, however you want to phrase that. And we say, well, what's the best axioms for discipline X? So with something like physics, what are the best axioms for physics? Well, what do you think? Do you want to give it a suggestion? Or because I could answer, but if you have any, it's not complicated axiom. What do you think is the most important axiom? Imagine you're God. You got to invent physics. Where do you start?
Golly.
Sorry,
I
got distracted by another video call coming in of the 3-year-old that I look after. Only he didn't get to see. He's not getting to see me this weekend, so instead we had to do a quick video conference thing.
That's cute.
So I got sort of distracted. I'm sorry.
I apologize. So, Kale, you are God. What do you do to build a universe?
That wasn't the question. The question was, how do you build physics? How do you build a model for physics?
Okay. I apologize for my blasphemy there.
No, it's all right. You're God. You took birth because mankind is fucking up again, and you got to help them build a physics model. Where do you start?
General relativity. From general relativity,
we're looking for one axiom.
Yeah, that's it.
General relativity has many axioms, and you have to mute when I'm talking because
the one axiom is things flow together. Everything moves towards maxima. That is the one axiom of this universe. Everything is constantly flowing towards the maxima.
Okay, so that would be maximization. And what do you think, Memes? Do you have any ideas for a first axiom?
That's a pretty good one. It's hard to argue with that, seeing as I've also kind of presented a model. It's like that's not a bad one at all. You're gonna have to you can maximize for something. That is one way. The other way, one could claim, would be you could maximize for simplicity. So that's what I'll do for this episode. Yes, I'm obviously standing on solid axioms. We're saying for this episode, I'm going to base everything on this one. Yes, I'm going to do it because I can. I'm going to say on simplicity, for simplicity's sake. Whatever.
The problem with simplicity is that we actually don't cognize in a simple manner. We cognize in a complex manner. That's why we have trouble with physics, because physics is simple. So I think it should be easy for us to understand, as easy as possible. If that's what you're saying, then I agree.
I'm just coming at it.
Maximization principle. The problem with a maximization principle is that matter is not maximized. Matter is conserved. So I think the most important part of physics is a conservation principle.
Does that make things simpler?
Is it possible to do anything in physics without presupposing
gravity is negentropic in that measure?
That doesn't mean that matter is not conserved.
Can
energy? Well, matter is not conserved, but energy is added at every moment to that matter. And since matter is made out of energy, then matter is not conserved. Everything increases in intensity constantly.
Energy doesn't increase, though. There's conservation of energy. So we have
holistically there's conservation of energy, but gravity is imbuing kinetic energy, which we had potential energy, which was a topological context, but we are gaining energy every second.
How about something about density flow? Because I've listened to a lot of your videos and your live streams on neutron decay cosmology. And
movement
my thing
towards
is,
maxima. Everything flows towards the maxima. Only is at the very precise moment you're at maxima, you took a step too far, and now you're at minima, and now you have to flow all the way to maxima again.
A maximum can't be an axiom because it's a derivative concept. And we don't want to have derivative concepts be axioms, because then philosophers are going to come in and say, why don't you just make your fundamental, why are you making a derivative concept an axiom? You should make a fundamental concept an axiom. And maximization implies a distance.
conservation doesn't allow for change.
That's right. We're talking about an essentially steady state model, which is consistent with all of the ancients. And so I'm fine with that. The mind is immutable. That is true. But then
But it's completely denied at all scales except for the absolute largest scale.
we exist. The scales are manifested materially, so they are not fixed. They're not static because matter has motion. So matter is not fixed, but the universe is a steady, so to speak, steady state. And the reason for that is
but
that,
the motion
easiest
of
intuition for that
matter
is
is spontaneous and therefore denies this stillness.
yeah. So the movement comes out of the stillness. That's not a contradiction. And if it is,
It's a
don't care.
flow towards maxima, though. Everything is going towards a more dense energy state. Always. It's the fundamental principle that makes anything move in the universe.
Well, energy dissipates all the time. So energy is not always getting denser. Energy dissipates all the time. So
Only to be captured by something and make that thing even more dense. Gravity is that. There wouldn't be gravity if there wasn't a flow to maxima. Gravity is the denial of this, of a true steady state. The steady state is a continuous flow to maxima.
Yeah, but the gravity is in matter, and what we're talking about is not in matter. So we have to bring it to something simple, extremely simple.
Wait, so you just so energy and matter completely distinct things? They're not actually the same thing?
I didn't say conservation of energy. I said you need a conservation principle as an axiom in physics. Conservation of energy is the current axiom that physics is using, but I am saying we should use conservation of consciousness instead. Because consciousness has structure and energy doesn't. And energy is basically not telling you anything that you care about. You're not saying anything by energy that you're not saying by, there's a conservation principle that allows us to make computations with matter, which is what I was alluding to earlier with physics, or sorry, chemistry.
That was deep.
Yeah, so that's how we would have to think about this. We have to remove everything and start with just presuppositions that we could theoretically remove, but that we probably won't, because everything we've seen to date is predicated on those axioms. For example, conservation. Nobody can do physics without some type of a conservation principle. And there's more things you could axiomatize in physics, but that's a starting point. But I think if we don't look at it that way, we're not going to be able to teach people why we're appealing to the mathematical structures that we're appealing to. Because ultimately, if it's not grounded in physics, there's no reason anybody should care about it.
Yeah, I think reconnection is probably like a fundamental axiom that's completely seems to have been sideswept or overlooked by physics.
Yeah, that's because physics has a surjection of subjectivity where, like, subjectively, which means the first person experience of consciousness, we tend to believe that the world is made up of a possibly infinite number of objects. So there's people, there's buildings, there's plants, and they're all different. And the world, if you add up all those constituents, you get the total world. That's how we tend to think about things. Do you agree with that?
It's the construction of stuff to one things.
Like, I think about things that way. That's how I perceive reality. It seems to be that reality is made up of parts, and together the parts make the whole. That's what it seems like, right?
Yeah, that's the way a child would perceive it. It's like they grab a one thing and then it's like, okay, then that is another thing. And the itemization is relative to their sort of, easily measurable sort of little space packages sort of thing.
Yeah, I call that naive realism. So we all have within our perceptual apparatus a tendency towards naive realism, which is a bottom-up belief in a constituency that spans the universe. So the universe is made up of parts, which are objects which are in some sense knowable.
Unum e pluribus.
So you could say that that is. Do you think naive realism is a good description for that? Because basically everyone does it.
I mean, are our eyes tuned to see what the heck is actually going on? I don't think so. I think my mind would explode if all of a sudden I'm taking all this information. So I tend to believe kind of adapted to a particular form in order to
It's not
exist
about
within
an
the realm we find
adaptation,
we
or it's not about that. It's just about whether you agree that that's a description of what it feels like to perceive things. Does it seem
Nerdy.
like you're perceiving a bunch of different things, and that together those different things make up everything?
Nerdy would like to know if he's a rat in a vat.
Well, is the skull of that?
To be fair, he actually memes around as a cartoon pickle often when you're on a live stream with him. So he throws people off with his rat form.
Mm.
I mean, who would ever do that? But it goes to those things, and it's like, all right, people will be like, "Oh, are we in a simulation? What the heck does that even mean?" There, it's like I sit
Well,
back more and more.
we can't talk about that stuff because we haven't grounded our discussion in any presuppositions. So to answer the question, let's say we had the answer, we couldn't give the answer because we'd be having to justify all of our presuppositions that got to the answer. So we can't start to answer stuff like that until we start with how are we going to understand the universe? Because my point was, so I don't know if you two have agreed or not about, it seems like reality is comprised of parts that together make up the whole, which I call naive realism, or also I call it a bottom-up metaphysics, which means like you're perceiving stuff as there's nothing and then there's a pile of stuff on the ground and then it builds up into everything. So it starts at the bottom and goes up.
I was going the
that's
other
the
way.
naive experience of, I think, all of us, like little physical beings, sort of thing.
Okay,
And then we start to learn about relationships of things and sort of like these, sort of commonalities of substructures or overstructures within things. It's like you learn, oh, a whole bunch of stuff sort of behaves the same, even though it's a whole bunch of different stuff. But there's underlying, it's got a commonality about its behaviors.
Right,
No, I
and
mean,
we don't know which commonalities ought to take precedence over the others, unless we can somehow find one commonality that derives all the other commonalities, and then we can presume that that commonality can exist in the absence of the others, and therefore is the cause, but we're not there yet. So my point is that you can't do philosophy using a bottom-up metaphysics. You have to use top-down. And the reason for that is that when you're talking about philosophy, you're starting with a state of being unqualified, and then you're gradually imposing qualifications or conditions on the unqualified state. And you have to be able to justify those conditions. Otherwise, you're not actually saying anything. So that's why I say, like, we have to basically do physics. We have to start at the top with no conditions and then impose conditions one at a time. And then physics will make sense. And it's not making sense now because we're trying to reconcile our perception, the surjection of our perception into physics doctrine, which is this bottom-up metaphysics, or ontology, if you want to call it that, and the reality, which is that there is no ontology and that there is no actual structure. It's just perceived structure, and therefore any structure we impose, which we need to impose to understand things, is a synthetic structure, but that's okay. But we still need to decide within this synthetic structure what is the best axioms. And so we have an axiom like a conservation principle, which it is synthetic in the sense that when we talk about it, it's via our aggregate form, but it's not synthetic in the sense that the universe in the empirical sense abides this principle. We have no counterexamples of a conservation principle and tons of examples of conservation principles and things like the Gibbs free energy that couldn't work without is something like a conservation principle operating.
Falling runs counter to conservation principle.
I'm sorry, I was distracted there. I was just saying before, I'm like, that's why I kind of started using the term Unum
or
e
are we
pluribus.
either that, or we have to sort of like imbue potential energy as an actual thing. And if we do that, then we definitely have to accept right away a overarching topology that accounts for that behavior.
So first step, conservation principle. Second step, topology.
But the conservation principle in the observable way is countered every single moment by anything that falls.
Yeah, you're talking about locally. You're saying locally stuff's not
Yeah,
conserved?
exactly.
Yeah.
Locally, it's undemonstrated. Locally,
conservation
there
principle
is
applies
not
to the universe.
conservation. Conservation is local in EM fields only, but in the aggregate of all behavior within any sphere of space materially, conservation is not observed because everything's falling and therefore aggregating and becoming more dense in one location and less dense in another location, which runs counter to conservation because that's a spontaneous symmetry breaking.
But what if it is
Okay, so I
conserved?
would just reject whatever theory denied conservation principles. I would just say that theory is false.
Now, Kali, when you say conservation is not conserved, you're talking about symmetry break there. It sounds
Gravity
like
is a spontaneous disavowal of conservation.
Is it? It has energy. It dissipates and as it affects other things and stuff.
No. You have random gas. Gravity aggregates it and makes it more dense in one place and less dense in another place. So holistically, you can say conservation, there's the same amount of stuff in this box still, but there was a spontaneous symmetry breaking in the gathering of all the objects into one location and the removal of all those objects from every place else, because this is what happens.
Isn't that kind of like more of like gets framed usually in the realm of like probability distribution, like
it's not a
oxygen.
probability distribution. Gravity is inevitable, so therefore there's an inevitable arrow of density maximizing.
I'm stuck right here because when you say the stuff in the box is the same amount of stuff in the box, I'm like, aren't we talking about the box?
No, let's say you have a box full of air.
Okay.
Only this is air that's going to obey gravity. And that air, a bunch of stuff floating in a box. So gravity will happen as Big Bang postulates. There's a bunch of random vague gas. It started to coalesce. Coalescing is a spontaneous symmetry breaking. It's that's a spontaneous symmetry breaking. That's not conservation of energy anymore. Energy had to be imparted into this space spontaneously, and I say it's by the topology. So if we construct a topology, that gives us all these behaviors. But unless we have the topology, there's no reason for gravity to exist, because gravity is not symmetrical and gravity is not conservational.
Yeah, gravity's not the fundamental thing in my worldview, so it's not a problem.
No, I think what I'm
Wait,
hearing from
gravity
Kali
is not fundamental? So, okay, wow, okay.
No, I don't think she's saying that we don't see the effects. She's just saying
gravity is emergent, actually. Gravity is of the same order as time.
To take one step back before we go two steps forward, I think Kali's point here is if all of a sudden, depending on what model you're focusing on, if all of a sudden you just have a bunch of gas and the gas just starts to come towards it, and like it was just stationary gas and you have like an equal distribution, however you want to phrase it, it's like, okay, what does that? I would conjecture that there may be a wee bit of motion affecting that, and I'll slightly more than hesitantly make a claim that I believe there's a topology that may explain that.
Don't you think it's weird that there's all these assertions about math and no evidence to back any of them up?
Gravity is the
Like
evidence
we
of the
can't even
cardioid
progress through an
shape of the
axiomatic.
universe.
We can't even progress through an axiomatic decomposition of physics. We're always cycling back to math.
I think
It doesn't want to
nerdy
talk
is
about
pro
math here.
emergence. I think it's I think gravity is very important to keep everything moving, because if all of a sudden it's like, oh, hey, by the way, oh yeah, all this oil pressure and stuff in your engine, yeah, that's pissing all over the, yeah, you're not going to get too far. That was a terrible analogy there. I did not think that through, but just that's where my mind initially goes, because again, like I'm sitting back, I'm like, based upon my familiarity with different things, I'm like, I think we're talking about a lot of the very same stuff, just using slightly different words. And then somebody's like, okay, well, does gravity not exist? Oh, no, gravity ends up coming out. And actually, to be fair, gravity is a ratio of, length, mass, blah, 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 blah. I forget exactly. There's like 3 terms that go
It's a
into it.
proportion between the product of mass and the square of the radial distance between the centers of mass, excuse me. So it is derivative of mass, so it co-arises with mass, because mass is
length, time.
what
Yeah.
computes it, and therefore it is of the order of mass, which is of the order of time, which is emergent. So that doesn't mean gravity doesn't exist. It means that you can't use gravity as the fundamental axiom, because gravity is caused by something else.
That's why she was saying, just to perhaps rephrase what you're looking to initially construct a universe from. Because if you can get away from something that might be emergent, because you go always say, oh, the electron, it's like, was the electron always here? I don't know, maybe it was there, but like the electron is a derivative out of mass. So that's actually, oh, that is interesting. I might need to redo some of my answers. I don't know. We'll have to see what's on the test next week. Yes, stuff and things. That is my cop out. It really creeps me out occasionally when we keep getting back to that.
Conservation alone won't make anything happen, because everything would stabilize.
Yeah,
and then there's no change. Yet. It becomes like a universal standing wave.
Yeah, that's right. So we don't have enough now. Having established a conservation principle doesn't fully establish physics, because, as you said, you don't have motion. So you
need that symmetry breaking of gravity.
You need motion.
That's the fundamental, though. Movement towards this maxima. That's all. And the maxima and the minima being the same place.
We don't want to inherit metaphysical structure here, so we can say there's motion, but we don't want to qualify it.
But there is a motion in a particular direction, always.
No, there isn't, because we'd be able to see it.
It's called down.
Yeah, so show me where down is on the universe scale.
Down is towards wherever density is. It's towards the more dense. It's towards maxima. That's down.
I think
the universe doesn't have a center. Down is defined relative to a center. And so it's a derivative.
The center is maxima.
Right. So that's another derivative concept. So we want to stick to just fundamental concepts. Like motion is a fundamental concept because it's unqualified. You're not saying what kind of motion it is. So conservation principle and then motion. And then
I would technically take a little issue with that statement. But I'm biased, and I may be completely misunderstanding.
If you take issue with it, you should say so. But we're not talking about math here. We're talking about physics.
The fundamental asymmetry is what has to be introduced, and you can choose it however you want to describe
structure. Symmetry presupposes structure. Why do you want to presuppose structure?
No. See, I think that's the issue what we're having. I think Kali's talking about a universe as it exists. Jen is basically saying it's like you're gonna build the universe.
I'm saying you have no reason to think that whatever model you're using for physics is right.
I would
And I
tend to
can tell
think
you many ways in which it's wrong. Therefore, you need to remove everything and start over. And this
I'm
is how you do
thinking
it, by
I'm thinking of
reasoning about what it is you're actually doing, not bringing in the stuff you already believe, which has been demonstrated not to work because straight lines aren't real. Ever. No
tensegrity.
straight line. Even on our scale, there's no straight line.
I don't know how that had to do with what we talked about so far, though.
No, 4 sticks. Why does it
Okay,
take 4 sticks?
a maximum implies a straight line because there's a straight line between a maximum and a minimum. So a maximum implies
No, you just didn't. No, there's no straight line anywhere, but you can still have a movement towards maxima. There's curved
and it
lines
implies
towards
a
maxima.
separation. It implies a separation. So a separation is a more fundamental concept than a movement towards a maximum.
Where's the separation?
For something to be moving towards something, it has to be separate from it.
Are we talking inside the
No,
box and
it can
outside
be
the
part
box?
of the whole. It can be
We're
part of the
talking about
thing.
axioms.
You can be the thing that is moving, and part of the whole thing that you are part of. For instance, part of a river, part of the water is moving in a river, and it is moving in a particular direction in that river, and it's moving down. And yet it's part of this whole thing. But at any point, you could say, oh, well, there, I can sort of spot an eddy by particular characteristics, which is what we do with atoms. Sort of, you go, well, I watched that eddy, and I watched that eddy move down the river. And it's like, well, it's all flowing in that thing, and it's part of the whole, yet you can still determine this quote unquote distinction by some arbitrary measure of arbitrary isness.
I think pictures would help. Just because I mean, if we're trying to define reality and stuff like that, it's like who knows what reality is?
We're not actually trying to define reality. We're trying to set the preconditions for physics. And
yeah, I just
really
don't think
hard.
this distinctness thing is necessary. You can be part of the whole thing, and you can have a different relationship to the locally to the other things that you're part of.
Show me a picture of a maximum that doesn't presuppose separation. Show it to me.
When you say separate, where does the issue coming in? Just because I believe
there's no separation in the fundamental. There's no separation in the fundamental level of reality. If your model invokes separation, you are saying my model's not right anymore. You're saying fuck it. I'm not gonna make a real model anymore. So if you want to have an axiom of separation, you're already disavowing your model as being possibly corresponding to reality, because real reality doesn't have categories. It doesn't have distinctions. It can't have.
So you're saying for the preconditions before things get going, like what would need to be in place?
Yeah, what do we need logically to do physics?
Okay, so we're literally at pre-universe here. What would the logic be in order to establish it? Because I feel like that's where the disconnect comes from. Yes, maybe. Because I feel like, okay, we have yet to have universe. I think Kali is operating within universe, and that's where she's kind of making her statements from, in that she believes gravity plays an integral. Well, we know it plays a very important
freezing
role.
A bit, so am I still coming through?
A little bit choppy, but I can hear you now.
Yeah, I guess I see it as like I even have a video of this, that like the collapse of anti-de Sitter space basically was like, it was like there can be anti-de Sitter space, basically sort of idea, except like there's just space. And what happens to that? What do we need to do? As you say, it's like, well, we have, okay, if we have conservation, which is an idea and seems to be quite prevalent in many ways here. Okay, we've got that, and we've got motion, but we need that. It's exactly this like symmetry breaking. It needs to be a place that is different from every place else. In my model, actually, what I have is a point of nothing. There's the empty set causes the universe's existence because everything wants to be at the empty set because there's nothing there. So everything rushes to be at the empty set because everything wants to be where there's nothing. And then all of a sudden you get crowding at the empty set. So now you have the surface of infinity density. And then around it is slightly less density because now there's slightly more room. And then some mosh pit, and it slowly goes back, less and less dense as you get further and further away from nothing. But I mean, that doesn't work at all with Jen's kind of epistemological modeling stuff.
No. I think you're talking past each other a bit there because she's talking about what is the literal logic you would need to press start and then go. You're operating
I know. It's like
yeah.
That's the thing. It's like, damn. It's like everything's a perfect crystal, and you need just the tiniest. And there's like a bunch of papers too about mathematicians. This collapse of ADS space. It's like everything's perfectly balanced, and then you just have the tiniest anything to disrupt that symmetry, and then the whole thing starts, and it's like an avalanche from then on. You know,
I like the mosh pit description. As somebody that's participated in my fair share of mosh pits, and that's where I usually get my level up shirt from. It was my old concert shirt.
You know what it's like, though. It's
Yeah.
like the very front of the fence is like you could not possibly fit more people. But slowly there gets to be room. And once you're like 10 rows back of people, you can start to mill around a bit and you've got a little bit of shoulder room, you know, and it gets better and better. And I always stand at the very back wall practically where I can actually see the stage above everybody's head, but I'm as far away from the crowd as possible.
And not get crushed as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
and not get crushed as well. And have lots of room for dancing because I like to fling my arms around.
Oh, you're one of those. I know you folks. But no, the reason why I don't think there's that actually much disagreement here is because I tend to think what you're saying, there may exist a point. Actually, I'm going to conjecture that there is a point at 0, 0, 0, 0, the isolated critical point of the real polynomial map of, oh yeah, this is all for the figure 8 knot there. So if one was going to say there is a point of stillness, well, there already is an isolated critical point where everything else basically goes around, like basically like a hyper mosh pit. Or I use the term
exactly
hyper
the surface of it, like the surface of the Higgs particle, to get into a very contemporary regular physics kind of talk, is the surface of that point. The neutron would be the first harmonic off of that, right? So now we've got like the particle, the sphere that can't be broken because it's the fundamental around nothing, which is the Higgs, which everyone possesses if you want to have mass. And then the neutron is the one layer outside of that, which can hang together when there's enough of an energy density, but falls apart when there's not enough of a density and falls apart into a particle of hydrogen. You know? And then the electron shells are almost like further harmonics on that in a way, if you get what I mean. It's like the way that they're stacked. It's like, wait, it's like Higgs, then neutron, then all the electron shells moving outwards.
Sounds like a bottom-up ontology starting with 0.
Yes, that's exactly what Memes is talking about.
Oh, I was going somewhere. No, you're talking about energy levels and stuff. I still need to finish investigating this. I love this. Oh, this is the echidnahedron. It's the 59th stellation of the icosahedron.
Oh, wait, memes, bring back that equation from a minute ago.
Oh,
the 0, 0, 0.
Oh,
0.
Okay. Oh, hold on. Bring it back up.
So yeah, this would not be something we could present to philosophy people because the presuppositions are just not clear what they are. And so if we want philosophers to care about this stuff, we have to be able to present it as axioms. And this is not in the form of axioms.
It's not in the form of axioms, but I mean, don't we
There's
need
an
kind of
axiom probably hidden in there, though.
Yeah, and it's not up to the philosophers to say it, or maybe it is.
I'm just saying I've heard a lot of
But,
folks
if
that
we want to do
seem
philosophy,
very.
we should know what the axioms are.
I've had some folks tell me that there exists a point of stillness, and that's very important somehow. I don't know how to get there, but I've heard people say that, and the closest
It's
thing I can get
because
to
it's nonsense. It's nonsense. A point is not something you can establish. What's a point? Show me a fucking point. It's an obvious concept. It's a human concept. A point is
No, it's a
no less
space
than
of
human concept than a
stillness,
line.
exactly one plank in size.
Yeah. So right now you're presupposing size, distance, length, which according to my theory is emergent. So it means that the non-moving thing is the HF8. It's the shape. That's the thing that doesn't move. It's completely non-moving. You know what I'm talking about, right?
No. Can you say more? I just want to.
I'll pull it
sure
about the complement, a hyperbolic complement of the figure eight knot.
Mm-hmm. Which is
that doesn't
moving
move.
or not moving?
It doesn't move. It doesn't change.
The knot or the complement?
The complement and the knot both don't change. I'm talking about the complement because the complement is the thing that is physically relevant.
How many sides does that thing have?
1, 2, rather. It has an inside and an outside.
Oh, okay.
I would actually say I would think that it might actually move. I tend to think
it causes
it's going
motion.
through a flow.
It causes motion, but it does not itself have any motion, because if it did, then the speed of light would change. So just remember that the speed of light doesn't change. Okay, so there is a stationary source of movement, and that is the unchanging speed of light.
This is the first time I've heard this.
So I've got it sharing now.
Go on. Okay.
Well, the idea with these shapes is that they're static. They don't move. I mean, the figure eight knot, if it moved, it would be a different shape, wouldn't it?
Wait, doesn't motion imply the same separateness or whatever it was that you were talking about, like the gravity flow?
Motion is just motion. Motion doesn't have to be separate. It can just be
it
one
moves
big
from
thing
one
moving.
place to another. Motion has to be a relative thing from one, like there's a separation to be able to move to or from.
Is there motion in a table? Yes. Does the table move? No. You can have stationary motion. It's not a problem. Stationary motion everywhere. The point is
it's
that
not
the shape of this thing doesn't move.
Movement around something, which ends up being stationary within a defined parameter. So now you've got to accept this definition of what you're moving around to be able to be continuously motion and yet in the same spot, which is moving, being in orbit.
No, I just say motion and I don't qualify it. So everything you're saying is qualified forms of motion, and I'm saying no, the axiom is just motion, not qualified motion, and certainly not mathematically qualified motion.
We're at like a case like pre-matter and stuff right now.
No, we're at the matter stage because we're doing physics, so we are looking at matter. But we're not talking about matter. We're saying how should we understand matter, and the way we're understanding matter now is by looking at how we understand physics and saying what do we need as axioms in order to get the result of physics.
Personally, my opinion is I think that thing could deform as it's basically just continuing to cycle universe as we know
if it deforms, let's say I poke it, is it still the hyperbolic complement? No, it's a deviation of it.
Oh, that can be projected however you want there.
Deviations of this. it's fixed in the sense that it has a specific shape and that shape doesn't change, but we can observe changes of that shape. That's the whole point of that shape being important, is that we can observe its deviations. We can't observe the shape though, but we only ever observe the deviations of that shape.
So the shape is okay. So the shape will always be the shape.
Exactly.
It's just
it's the same with any mathematical concept. It's like, does a circle move? No, a circle doesn't move, because if it moved, it wouldn't be a circle anymore. It's the same with anything. Like, you change one thing about a shape, it's not the same shape anymore, because a shape is defined by not moving the shape. So the idea is we have an immutable shape which dictates the progression of motion in the universe. So yes, it's a steady state model in the sense that that shape is unchanging, in the sense that the speed of light is unchanging, but it's not a steady state model in the sense that there's no motion, because obviously there is motion and we want to account for that motion, and we do so by saying all motion is a result of deviations of this steady state.
so when we say, would an undulation or an oscillation, would that be better terminology?
No. The traditional word is dosha, which means it doesn't have a translation to English, but the closest is deviation or kink. And I'm not going to use kink for several reasons that I
was
won't
going to
go
say you
into
bring
right
in a
now.
whole new audience for that, but maybe not the direct target
Well,
audience. I mean, I'd watch for this.
I don't know how much you know about definitions and stuff, or not definitions, sorry, translations. I don't know how much you know about that, but you can't always translate a word.
Oh, no, I was
If you
thinking
know what
like
I'm saying.
mathematical and projection. Oh, actually, that is kind of how I think about translating between people and stuff like that. So, no,
I'll show you a
I've always
picture
been
that shows you
very,
why
very
it's deviation.
curious as to how they translated curve when Einstein was doing his early work. I'm like, are you sure it shouldn't say gradient? Because a gradient is more like, could be in any dimension, whereas the application of the word curve implies this, like, imposes a sort of like pre-existing two-dimensional shape that you've now got a form in the two-dimensionality, whereas gradient is more like an increase in darkness, increase in density of these things in a more general sense, not curve. That's why I was like, I've always been curious about going through Einstein's early papers, and it's like, where did that get translated as curve in space exactly?
What makes you think there was a translation involved? Like, are you talking about from German to English?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of that, even these days, interest in translating German to English. Technically, English is a dialect of German, although they are not mutually, I guess the word is conversant. Like, you can't necessarily speak German or English if you speak the other. But yeah, always interesting to look at etymology. But in this case, we're talking about a concept. And so what happens? So we do have evidence of, see on the bottom, there's a fish and a human. So if you deviate the shape of the original shape on number one, the complement of the hyperbolic, the hyperbolic complement of the figure eight knot, if you deviate that shape, you get a shape of life forms. And a deviation is basically pressing on the surface equally, not exactly equally, but symmetry arises from this pressure. So you can see that every life form has one at least approximate axis of symmetry. That's not going to be a perfect axis of symmetry, because the curve of the knot, as you can see, is not a perfectly symmetrical thing. The twist to the right relative to the top is lower than the twist to the left, if that makes sense. So yeah, deviation is the right word.
To be fair, I kind of, at least to my knowledge, I'm kind of picturing that the knot itself, because this is the complement right here. This is basically our main point of topic. But that is when you subtract out everywhere the knot is within whatever given space that you're defining there for its volume. Basically, the knot itself is going around and doing all these crazy things within there, and that's why I kind of like that mosh pit scenario, even though what's in there would be completely separate from whatever else would be outside.
Memes is talking about something that people in math are really not going to understand, because this is something that even me, who studied math for a very long time, struggles to understand, is that the complement of a knot, in some sense, represents motion. Can you tell us a little bit about that, if you understand what I'm saying?
So the best way, and this is something we've been working on, because that the whole complement of that knot, it's made up of basically two Giesking manifolds. So the Giesking is a constant that, like, we know we have a closed form and stuff for it. The problem is, if you look up Giesking manifold anywhere on the internet, there's like nothing there. It's like, oh, it's made from doing appropriate Dane surgeries on an idealized tetrahedra. What the heck does that mean? You're basically kind of folding it over and everything like that. It's very hard to get a visualization. The first time I ever asked ChatGPT or one of those AI things, could you do something on the Giesking manifold? It literally gave me a picture of a cave and like a 20-foot tall dire wolf standing in the middle of it. Now, I don't know. I mean, it was absolutely fantastical.
It got trained a little too heavily on Game of Thrones, apparently.
I feel like I asked it something about who is Fizz Giggity, my co-host from Breaking the Multiverse. So it deposited some wolf in there. That's my best assumption. I don't remember, but it's hard. But basically, if you could fold that into a Kleinian, what's the best one? It's twisting under a Mobius twist, doing a Kleinian maneuver, and you have two of those that make up that particular form there, and one's going one way, and the other, I believe, is it the exact other way, or it's 90 degrees to it? That's very important. I don't remember. But one's going one way, the one's going the other way, so then you just end up having basically the style of, they would technically be rotate. Like if you were an ant standing on it, you'd probably be like flying all around. To observers like us, to my knowledge, it would just be literally to a point, or at least 10 to the
That's
negative 8
not
meters.
exactly what the answer I was after here. So
Okay.
We're talking about the map from the figure 8 knot to the complement of the figure 8 knot.
Oh, I have not seen this before. Go on.
It requires you to figure out everywhere the knot isn't. How do we figure out everywhere in math?
Well, that's that would take a long time, I hear.
Calculus, right? Calculus. You go everywhere on the function.
Well, it's infinitesimal.
So we're moving through the function through the infinitesimal. So it presupposes motion, because anytime you do an integral, you are moving across the function. You're presupposing that you can move across the function with an infinite number of infinitely small steps, which is obviously a presupposition, right?
Okay.
So the way I look, I think you are really overcomplicating it. The way that I look at the 888, the first knot, I'll bring it up just if people want to follow along. So we have these knots, and if you're interested, you want to look this up in topology. We have these knots. So this is the knot we start with, and this knot represents, do you remember?
Oh, this is
okay, let's just see if, I don't think I'm sharing the right tab here. Sorry.
I'm seeing element right. 119, so I'm a little confused.
The one on the right, do you know what this represents?
Oh, I believe the answer you're looking for is 3 plus 1.
That's right. So it's impossible to have 3 plus 1 simultaneous observations. So that knot is the representation, the geometric representation of 3 plus 1. So the physical correspondence to this is the exclusion principle, the quantum state exclusion. So this is basically saying that quantum state exclusion is impossible. So that shape, according to my theory, is an impossible shape. And its complement is not only possible, but it's necessary. So the complement of this is everywhere that knot isn't. And it represents quantum state inclusion. And quantum state inclusion is what we have here. The
Via the
inclusion of
complement?
quantum states. The complement is the geometric representation of the inclusion of quantum states. So you think about it logically, what is excluded? 3 plus 1. What is included? Everything that's not 3 plus 1. And what does that look like? The complement.
So, oh, okay.
So where are you starting in terms of an axiom? Well, it tells you, the math actually tells you, we start with the axiom of quantum state exclusion. Because the entire shape of reality is something that derives from the impossibility of quantum state inclusion.
So the ability to differentiate.
Well, hang on a minute. Yeah, quantum state exclusion. Quantum state inclusion is excluded, so quantum state inclusion is included. So the states that we have access to are the ones that are separate from 3 plus 1.
Because since that is reality, as some may say.
Well, what's reality, right? Like, we haven't even started talking about reality. We're talking about deriving physical concepts. Reality hasn't actually come into it yet, because reality is our idea. Physics doesn't necessarily have the same notion of reality. So we just have to think of physics in terms of a logical sequence of axioms through which we are finally, at the end of the axioms, getting to what it is that we're looking at. And we're already doing this for everything that we think about, because the axiom we presuppose without thinking about it is anything to do with language. So we're already doing that. But when we do philosophy, we actually bring it out of subconscious into conscious and say, well, let's actually formally systematize these processes. So I think that's how that makes sense to me, because you don't have to actually invoke particles to get quantum state exclusion. You can say there's a knot, and the knot determines quantum state exclusion. And then there's another thing, which is not a knot, it's a knot complement. And that other thing determines the shape of matter. And so far, I've shown that it determines the biological shape of matter, but it also determines the physical shape of matter trivially through Thad's theory. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to trivialize Thad's thing.
No.
That's the technical term. It's trivial in the sense that it's always true. So that's actually a good thing. It's just that the trivial solution doesn't give us the full answer, because we don't really necessarily think we can determine things like, caring about whatever it is you care about as a function of light speed, for example. Probably isn't going to look that way at the end of the day.
So at times like this, I feel like the most appropriate action is
this the real life? Is this just fantasy? Caught in a landslide, no escape from reality. Open your minds, look up to the skies and see. I'm just a fool.
For reference, this gentleman is in the back of an RCMP car. He was highly intoxicated, taken into custody, and he totally nails pretty much almost line for line all of Bohemian Rhapsody over the next 6 minutes. It's actually very impressive.
Leave it to the RCMP to make a meme about that.
That's literally that's just their cam footage and everything. It was made public and everything, and people just meme the heck out of that guy, because it's like, he's drunk, he's ranting about the cops and everything, and then while he's completely hammered, he sings Bohemian Rhapsody. I mean, it's memes itself. So, that's I don't know. I'm sorry I cut you off, Jen. But,
well, just so everyone knows, it gets really cold in Canada, so we need to find novel ways to amuse ourselves sometimes, which may extend to singing a cappella in the back of a police car in an advanced state of intoxication.
I like Canadians.
Wait, aren't you someplace where it's spring right now?
Oh, I've moved. I don't
Okay.
understand it anymore. But yeah, it was. I still
Yeah,
remember.
because you don't want to be here, and it looks like we're going to be doing one of those snow on Halloweens.
Yeah, it's so weird because my dad was just telling me that it was like hot at the beginning of October, which it almost never is, but I guess it switched quick this year. Dang.
Yeah, no, we got our like Indian summer at the start of October, and it was like 30 C, you know, in like early
Yeah, that's
October.
like unheard of.
Yeah, but it's like plunged, and it's, you know, it was like 5 the other night or something like that. It's heading down, so I won't be surprised if we get one of those snow on Halloweens.
See, I'm not sure what to expect here because all of a sudden it's like, all right, it's October. I'm like, it's like still 70 degrees out during the day. I don't know, because maybe like over here in Utah, it's like we're around 5,000-ish feet, a little under a mile, like 4,600 or something like that. And then like at night, it gets freaking chilly out and stuff like that. Well, because we're up high. But I remember, I remember like snow in September, October, and everything. I remember going to a Halloween party, and literally there was an ice storm, and we're just hearing trees crack, crunching power lines. The power goes out. The power's out like 12 days in one of the more rural places. And oh my God, I remember it was literally like, sorry for this tangent, but about a week and a half before, it was like 60 something degrees. I'm going out with a jog with my buddy Lottie, and he's over from Czech Republic over in Europe. And as we're running, he's like, Memes, why do they put the power lines by the trees? And it was a shocking question because I'm like, that's what we always do. And I'm like, oh, maybe they think if something goes wrong, it'd be cheaper to rather than putting them all underground. And 10 days later, that entire town lost power for almost 2 weeks. It's just planning and everything, but
You're
I
really
didn't know
prophetic.
no, he asked the question. I'm just like, that was the obvious thing. So Jen has escaped Canada. There you go. Maybe it won't be as chilly.
Yay. So yeah, this is the way to get differentiation without separation. So you have the shape, and then all you have to do is deviations of that shape. So you can recover the same shape through deviations as well. So you don't have to separate from that shape to deviate it into the various shapes of biological life that you might be interested in. So notice how we haven't actually got to particles yet or math. So we're already at a biological model that doesn't invoke particles, unless you want to count the shape as a particle, which I don't. It doesn't really appeal to it's. I would say that it is a shape, or you could call it but even calling it a geometry kind of presupposes that we're measuring it, and we can't measure this thing. We can infer that it's just like the speed of light. We can't measure the speed of light directly. We have to infer it.
So you wouldn't use the term body?
We could, but we would be
object?
we would have to go back into the Indian scripture and make sure we're using the right translation. So let's just not do that and just go with whatever English words make sense. And then once we understand this stuff well enough, what the Indian scripture is saying will be really obvious, or hopefully obvious, because it's the way it's framed right now is in terms of an ego or an Atman, which is not a concept that the West is really familiar with.
Yeah, we usually take the flying birds and oh, hey, follow me. Speaking of folks flying around to get us our deliveries and everything.
Like there's concepts in Indian philosophy that I'll talk about, like karma is the principle of cause and effect. Like I'll bring those up, but something like Atman, I tend to not bring it up because I don't know how to translate it. And so there's no conceptual equivalent in English, which means that people can't think about the concept, which means that we have to sort of put in a different concept to a lattice so that they can have the equivalent of that concept through other means. And ideally, it's concepts that already exist. That's why I'm using math and logic and physics and stuff rather than something abstract that you're going to lose half the audience. Like I know I lose half the audience already, but I hope it's clear that I'm trying to make this at least somewhat palatable to Western audiences. But yeah, there is a word, and body is not a bad word for it, because as you can see, it brings about bodies.
I personally prefer object because I think that's more of a mathematical term, and that
Yeah,
can
that's
encompass the
exactly what
body.
I'm thinking. That's
Body takes
exactly what
more
I'm thinking.
physicality to it there because it's like because I heard folks a lot of times saying, "Well, physics is the study of bodies and stuff like that." I'm like, I don't think we're there yet, so I'm like, I'll do
That's
an
why
It's much
people
worse
object.
than
use
that.
like form, where it's like a more generalized thing, where it's like, you know, the same way that it's like a coffee cup is a torus in that form way, even though it's not strictly geometrically the
They're
same.
topologically equivalent, right?
Exactly. And that's the way you can address this, where it's regardless of whether it's more squat or this proportionalities, the structure of the flows within it always conform to some certain configuration.
Yeah, so you'd agree that these figures are all topologically equivalent.
I'll accept that. I mean, I'm like going to do like, you know, analysis, but I like, sure, I believe that. You know, I'm still all about the trefoil and not the figure eight, because it's not, to me, it's not 3 plus 1 making 4, but it's 3 that is 1 being the fourth.
The trefoil, or actually two trefoils, are coming. Need to finish. Thad had made a couple of videos, and I still need to learn a little bit more. But it does appear that where were we? We were exploring. I don't know if it was the gamma or the zeta function or something, and it looks like there's a couple of trefoils emerging. I still need to. I would say more on it, but I'm far too ignorant.
What's funny is the trefoil knot is its own anti.
Oh, when you spread it and everything, it's
the whatever that thing is, you know, the of the hyperbolic of the trefoil is just the trefoil knot. There's only one thing. The trefoil knot both describes itself and it describes its exterior simultaneously.
And that's a special property of fourness, isn't it?
Of what?
Fourness, cardinality 4.
I don't know.
Like in topology,
the
the
trefoil
knots that are
has
interesting.
it. But as I said, I think it's like this, like more like it's like the 3, and then it's like you have 0, 0, 0, and I'm going to just use this to connect with memes thing. You don't need the 4th 0 because the brackets themselves are the 4th 0, if you get what I mean.
I understand how something could represent a 4th 0. I don't see how the brackets do. Yeah, that's where I'm at.
I'll just bring up a video that Kali had done there. I just muted the volume so maybe she can guide us through this a little bit because it's where is it? Goes to I think it's more over here. Here we go. I just saw some of this and it's like, oh, I think there might be a slight difference in
Okay, sorry,
interpretation.
I'm off the mute again now. Okay, so yeah, you take a cardioid, and when you make a cardioid out of just a curve using like 1 minus psi and then 1 minus psi of theta, then theta, that creates a cardioid. But interestingly, I didn't even notice, but you pull the cardioid apart, and actually there's 2 cardioids woven inside each other that hide most of the time, and still you sort of do this phase separation of them.
It kind of looks like a double cover.
Yeah, here as it keeps on coming down, give it a minute. It will even out perfectly, which is where it ends up being exactly that. And I didn't even realize when I was goofing that it was.
You can represent that by basically pulling the trefoil.
It's sort of like the hop vibration of the trefoil knot. because it's slightly out of sync so that it ends up being an endless stream of them. But if you closed it as a closed cycle, it would be a trefoil knot.
See, I find that fascinating. Again, totally biased, but I would personally say that in the middle there, I would say it's the complement of the figure 8 knot, because it would be undergoing some, if there's motion happening, it would bounce there. Again, I could be wrong, but I do feel like this is part of it there. Some form of that motion there. It just, I think we're all really going in the same direction. It's just
which
the
actually
specifying of
connects
those words.
beautifully with Goethe's, wasn't it? No, Gödel's model for gravity. There's this weird, beautiful picture that I post sometimes, but it was like Gödel had this drawing of like motion and, you know, time and all of this. He was like contemplating, and it like so connects with both of these models. It's really amazing.
Oh, well, we just blew T Carr's mind.
Yeah, so we can still use a lot of this math stuff. We just have to start looking at the math structures as shapes, not necessarily as functions, because we're going to want to do functions between the shapes.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's more like just using this to help us visualize, you know, like flow forms and stuff like that. As you said with the like the figure 8, it's like having that as a model, because now we can generalize that onto like the biological forms as you guys have in that diagram, which is really beautiful.
Thank you. I've been working so hard to like get other people to be able to see what I see, and when they can, it just makes me so happy, and like all the horrible failures that I've had have been worth it for the minor successes. Oh yeah.
No, hey, no, it's a we're in this together. I would conjecture together forever. That was a quote from the Macho Man Randy Savage. May he be at peace. But no, I love
So
that
yeah,
stuff.
here's how this comes back to what I was saying before, is that instead of starting bottom up with points and lines, which are relatively simple, we're starting top down with the maximally complex shape, which is this one here. So yeah, it's complicated, but it doesn't get more complicated than that. That's it. It represents the complement of a simultaneous 3+1-ness. And what is a 3+1-ness? Well, it's a primitive notion, because we can't really get underneath it, because once we get to 3+1, we're at numbers, and numbers are empty concepts for numeralization that we derive synthetically from differentiating amounts. So what you have is a primitive notion, which is primitive in two senses, which is really useful because it's very simple to introduce somebody to the concept and they will understand part of it. And no one's ever going to understand all of 3+1-ness, because it's Turia, an ancient concept. You can't transcend it. It's more so a description of the state of affairs. It's just something we explore and evolve within. So you're always working with a partial understanding, but when you have a primitive notion that is intuitive, you will have some understanding. So we can say 3+1, well, there's 3 physical spatial dimensions and then 1 temporal dimension. So that is the sense in which Brahman's mind vibrates or thinks on our scale. And Brahman thinks on every scale. So we have that little bit of knowledge that takes us. So the choice of your primitives is extremely important, because you don't want it bottoming out in something unjustifiable like a straight line, but you also don't want it continuing on forever to just random concepts that we have to ourselves speculate through interferential observation.
So to take a step a little bit back from more of, some may say, the metaphysical, with it, no, I don't disrespect on that, but I'm trying to distill kind of, okay, so from this minimal object form, we can derive enormous, or from a minimal form, we can derive maximal complexity. Is that the right framing? Or
right framing is that complexity is invariant. It is always 3+1. And that is another example of God's perfection, and that he reveals himself to us everywhere. And so we're only ever as mistaken as we want to be. And we're always as learned as we can be if we have the right attitude that this is ultimately the only discovery that we're making. And complexity implies structure. There is no structure. Therefore, for complexity to be anything other than invariant would contradict the metaphysics of this system. So we always account for complexity as something that emerges from this fundamental. It's not simple, though. It has a cardinality of 3 + 1. So everything is equally complex, if that makes sense.
How would we differentiate what we know as
How do we get a model for
plant?
complexity, you mean? How do we
Complexity
get a
as
model
we
for
know it,
complexity?
yeah.
We would need to say complexity for something, because categoricals don't exist in the abstract. They're always co-arising with their discipline, as I mentioned earlier, where you need axioms to infer across a discipline and they co-arise together. So complexity for biology, the strength, the way that I express that is that the level of consciousness, which is not equal to intelligence. Okay, so for example, take the anglerfish. Do you know what the anglerfish is? It's the special
The
fish with
sparkly
the
light.
light bulb
Yeah.
looking thing on their forehead.
Yeah.
So they have a lot of
Freaks out
consciousness.
kids.
That they have a lot of consciousness. How do we know? Because there's a lot of energy, and energy is a fundamental product of consciousness. They have a lot of energy in that light. Does that mean that they're intelligent? No. So to have a lot of consciousness, to be evolving towards a state of having more consciousness, does not mean you're getting smarter. It just means that the density of consciousness within your physical being is increasing, and the manner that it increases is through the deviation. So the amount that the shape is deviated from the original shape. So how many instances of pressure? So if I'm starting with a shape that looks like the hyperbolic figure 8 complement and it's made out of clay, how many times do I have to push into that clay to get to the anglerfish, to get to Kali, to get to memes? It's
Why is this
degrees.
the first photo that they show? No wonder this is nightmare fuel for children. Poor anglerfish. What did it ever do? I'm going to send pictures like that to Fizz, the Terrifier. But, it's, okay. It's, so now what we were saying is, okay, we have a fundamental object that we can use to iterate things. Okay. And then
The object instantiates all appearances of objects, but there are no objects in materiality, because materiality is subject to impermanence, and an object is a fixed boundary.
Okay, so we can have objects transforming stuff by doing things.
But we could say that materiality is objective in the sense that matter appears to be comprised of objects. So we're back to the bottom-up ontology that we presuppose through our subjectivity of, oh, this is a bunch of things that together these things make up the whole. But actually, no, it is activity happening in the whole which brings about the appearance of particular things.
Unum pluribus, of one, many.
Yeah, so instead of looking at people as being all different, you're looking at them as different versions.
I shouldn't have assumed everyone spoke Latin. I apologize. I probably would have made the conversation a lot easier if I actually had to translate into words that people understood.
Yeah, actually, there's that paper I came across recently that was looking at Brownian motion and the evolution of Brownian motion forms within fluids, spontaneous rotational forms that basically take the Brownian motion and rotationalize it as a method of containing it, and therefore sort of minimizing it by doing that. It was really fascinating.
Yeah, we have another postulate, which is the minimization of energy or maximization of entropy, which we can invoke. And we can say, well, these forms don't have any cause to evolve. Why would there be a bunch of energy that evolves in the form of consciousness? And the answer is because we have the conditions on Earth that allow us to evolve, which is a surplus of energy from the sun. So it is only that surplus that has allowed us to evolve, which of course makes sense because we don't see humans on Mars. without the atmosphere. And so that evolutionary pressure is sort of, you can think of it like squeezing a pimple. You have a certain amount of consciousness, which over time gets constricted to a smaller and smaller volume because its motion is the result of deviations of a single form. And so the more it evolves, it's evolving away from that form. And so the more away from that form it goes, the more pressure it has. The more pressure it has, the more consciousness it has, which, remember, consciousness is not intelligence. But when we use this philosophy, we are hacking into our consciousness to leverage it to optimize intelligence.
Until it gets popped and it goes all over your mirror because you're going through your teenage years and you're an acne-ridden fool.
Well, I like that metaphor because it kind of shows that, like, the pimple of the anglerfish got popped completely differently than the pimple of humans, and we evolved more evenly throughout our form, whereas the consciousness became super saturated in that light bulb.
Oh, constant pokey deformations. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, so the deformations are pressure brought about from the pressure of the atmosphere.
I mean, I got nothing wrong with things adapting or evolving to their environments. Pretty much won't matter what it is. I mean, if life's going to have a purpose and okay, now I'm conjecturing, there's a purpose
do you
to
see
life.
how the human is more deviated than the fish?
There's a fish?
Yeah, it's on the bottom left.
Oh.
It's my incredibly shitty fish. I'm sorry.
I thought it was a jellyfish. I thought it was like a jelly. Okay,
The problem
it's
is
still a
that
fish.
all mammals basically have not identical, but very similar morphologies. So I put the fish there because it doesn't have hands and feet. But yeah, back to what I was saying. Do you see why the human is more evolved than the fish? Because it has a greater deviation from its original shape.
Yeah, it requires more pokey inputs.
Exactly. So the pokey inputs, that's the evolution pressure brought about by the atmosphere. And the degree of pressure is going to be an indication of how much consciousness has evolved locally within that organism. But that's not going to tell you intelligence, because intelligence doesn't equal consciousness. Consciousness is like a substratum from which intelligence could evolve. But like an anglerfish, even though it has a lot of consciousness, cannot really get that intelligent. Whereas humans, we've got the basic, we are evolved to evolve.
Yeah, it's more like the anglerfish purely embodies its intelligence, or its
Exactly.
Is
That is exactly what I was getting at.
Right. Whereas humans, it's more like we've been created to be multi-use. It's almost like we're the Turing machine of biology, in that we're the thing that makes things that do anything. You know, it's like we don't even do it. We don't do the thing. We are the things that can make the thing to do anything at all. It's like we're the computational tool for creating even greater complexity than us, which is like one thing when you were talking about that, which is really interesting, is because octopus are in a way then strangely timeless, because apparently they can like rewrite themselves. They've got extremely live morphable DNA in a way that we don't. We've embodied a certain amount, but our brains were constructed in this way because it's like, well, this isn't really a thing. You shape the structures inside this, the forms inside this, to be able to make anything you want inside here. And then after you've made it inside here as a model, you then evert it and make it into a material thing.
Yeah. We are the dreamers and the memers of dreams. I mean, the story of humanity is that of overcoming. I mean, that's what I'll postulate and that's what I'll claim. And maybe I'm wrong, but hey, I'm hoping for the best. Oh my God, it's a little octopus.
I have been obsessed with these little guys for a while. And yeah, I love this one.
Well, now that we brought out the baby octopi, I think going on for over an hour and a half. We're pushing 2 hours now, so I think we can wrap up. Jen, get some words for the folks. What's going on with you and the baby octopi?
I think their ability to change color is strong evidence for the mind operating on the basis of entangled photon waveform. And I've seen a video, I don't have it on me, but I've seen a video of them changing colors when they're dreaming. So yeah. Anyway, I think they are super cool. And yeah, otherwise, I've been really loving this conversation. I feel like I got a chance to get a lot of my points out, and I really appreciate both Callie and Memes for listening and contributing. And I feel like we did advance the conversation today, and I hope people are hopeful and feel encouraged, especially if you don't have a physics and math background. Like Memes doesn't either. Like, and I'm trying my best to explain this stuff in terms of logic that will be somewhat mathematical, geometric, but doesn't necessitate you to spend a tremendous amount of time familiarizing yourself with a corpus of mathematical doctrines that may or may not ever be relevant to your process of intellectual inquiry. So we appreciate the feedback in the chat. Thanks to everyone for participating, and looking forward to the next one. Bye for now.
Totally. Golly. Words? Oh, Kali is done. So, all right. Well, that's all we got for right now, folks. Hey, peace out, everybody. Take care of yourselves. It's a wacky and wild world out there, but it's open for a better tomorrow, I claim. Peace out, everybody. See ya.